This is Middle East Now. I'm Benice Levine in Tel Aviv, and we start in the north of Israel. A fatal rocket strike in the city of Kiryat Shmona on Wednesday afternoon. A man and a woman in their 40s killed in the Hezbollah rocket barrage launched out of Lebanon while they were out walking their dog. Earlier in the day, 5 people, including a teenager, injured by shrapnel as a result of rocket impacts in the Haifa area. And overnight, Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon intensifying, targeting a weapons manufacturing plant in Beirut and an intelligence command center. Before that strike, the IDF issuing a warning to civilians in the area. More in this report by Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran.
A series of heavy rocket barrages on northern Israel, this time with deadly results. A couple in their 40s were killed after being hit by one of 20 rockets launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon at Kiryat Shmona on Wednesday.
A couple was out walking their dogs when the rockets came. One hit roughly 20 yards from them, severely injuring them and the dogs. They were pronounced dead on the scene.
Throughout the day, Hezbollah launched dozens of rockets at Israel's northern communities and a highway, including the largest single barrage of over 90 rockets at Safed. A total of 9 people were injured in various degrees.
We received a total of 8 injured individuals. They all suffered from shrapnel wounds in different parts of the body. 7 are in mild condition, and 1 who was critically wounded now in moderate condition.
The IDF says Hezbollah has launched at Israel more than 12,000 rockets, missiles, and drones since the start of the war a year ago. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes against dozens of Hezbollah targets across Lebanon continued, including striking launch pads and eliminating terrorists. Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati said mediation efforts for a ceasefire with Israel are still ongoing, with Hezbollah's deputy leader indicating they are ready for a deal.
We support the political efforts that Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri is undertaking towards a ceasefire. In any case, after the ceasefire is established and diplomacy is able to achieve it, all other details will be discussed and decisions will be taken collaboratively.
Whether they actually mean it remains unclear, as the Biden administration downplayed chances for a deal at the moment, while voicing support for Israel's efforts to degrade Hezbollah infrastructure.
For a year, you had the world calling for this ceasefire. You had Hezbollah refusing to agree to one. And now that Hezbollah is on the back foot and is getting battered, suddenly they've changed their tune and want a ceasefire. I think it's not surprising given the situation they find themselves in.
Meanwhile, the IDF's ground operation in southern Lebanon continues to expand. Israeli forces eliminated terrorists in close-quarter combat and located terror tunnels hidden beneath civilian homes.
Hezbollah is storing their weapons under the cover of Lebanese civilians. The IDF is operating against Hezbollah with a clear goal to remove the threats to Israeli civilians and enable all residents to return to their home in Israel in safety and security.
A day earlier, Israeli forces demolished a tunnel that crossed into Israeli territory in the western sector of the border, near the Lebanese village of Mawachin, just across from the Israeli community of Zar'it. The IDF said there are no other tunnels known to cross into Israel from Lebanon, as it continues to act to remove the ground threat to Israel's northern border.
So for the latest on the ground, we now go live to correspondent Robert Swift. He joins us from Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel. And Rob, to think a man and a woman take their dogs for a walk and then Hezbollah launches yet another rocket barrage at northern Israel. What is the latest? What can you tell us?
So in the last few minutes, the IDF has released an update on some of the events that have taken place in the northern theatre today. They noted that among the rocket attacks was also a drone, a UAV, that was launched from Lebanese territory along the coastline, and this was intercepted by an Israeli naval vessel. On top of this, they also said that the Israeli Air Force had struck at 2 of the locations from which the large-scale barrages today, the barrage against Shlomi and the surrounding area, and the other barrage against Safed, which is one of the largest barrages to take place today. that both those locations have been struck by the IDF. Now, this comes after what it looks to me to be about 20 different cross-border attacks across the course of today. Now, there hasn't been any notable security events in the last, I would say, about an hour and a half. But prior to that, we've seen a huge scale of launches. Not only was there multiple large-scale barrages, there's also been numerous more low-key launches with smaller numbers of rockets, but still clearly dangerous, lethal projectiles being fired across different areas of the border, from the far west, the coastline, right across to the east, and everywhere in between. Now, the barrage that took place earlier on the Safed area, that resulted in one rocket landing directly on a home, causing a light casualty there.
Thank you so much. Much on the go up north. We will be coming back to our correspondent Robert Swift for more updates from Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel. For now, be safe. Thank you, Rob. And now, for more insight, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Shiri Fein-Grossman, member of Forum Devora, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security, and the former head of Regional Affairs in the Israeli National Security Council, and Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the US, the former Israeli deputy foreign minister, and the chairman of Silver Road Capital. Thank you both so much for being here. There are so many security threats unfolding at the same time. And Danny, I want to come to you right now. We hear Hezbollah is on the back foot. That's according to the insights out of the US. But when I look at that update from Robert Swift on the ground, 2 people took their dogs for a walk and they were killed by Hezbollah fire. Your assessment of what is happening right now?
Well, Hezbollah is certainly down, but it's not out. And although most of its, the highest echelons are pretty much dismantled and destroyed, still they have some capabilities which maybe are not the ones that they had before. I believe most of their strategic capabilities, meaning the long-range missiles, the accurate ones, the ones that we are heavy warheads, mostly are out. But there are still those medium range and short range, and they are still capable of making a lot of damage. A lot depends on the the citizens' behavior, staying in close areas or very close to shelters. And I think this is actually the standing order from the IDF and the other authorities to really stay by very close to shelters. Of course, nothing condones this brutal murder of this couple that you mentioned were walking their dogs. It's just horrible. But if you remember, over the last 11 months, and we talked about it, where Hezbollah just indiscriminately were shelling at our citizens, the IDF was very accurate, actually peeling one after another strategic assets of Hezbollah to the point where they are now pretty much under, almost on the verge of destruction. Doesn't mean that there are still all those units. There's no one that can take a strategic decision over there. So they continue almost like by inertia. And it's very hard to go after launcher by launcher. At the end of the day, we'll have to have a ceasefire, but this ceasefire, I believe, now will be on Israel's term.
Shiri, your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely the command and control of Hezbollah has been badly hurt, and there's advantages and disadvantages to that. If we want to have some sort of ceasefire, who do we speak to? How do we de-escalate the situation will be one of the challenges once Israel decided that it wants to de-escalate. Right now, it seems that the Israeli government is very determined to proceed, and rightly so, with hurting as much as possible from the Hezbollah capabilities. And I want to urge us all not to look at the results of the 2 fatalities we had today, but the ongoing daily attack on the north of Israel, unprovoked, did nothing to bring this. And the people in the north are going through such a terrible year, actually, a year of this, where every day there are attacks, and it's because Iron Dome and other defense systems that we have, but it's also a lot because of the citizens that are adhering to instructions to go to safe places that we have low fatalities up till now. But we were lucky. It doesn't mean that the capabilities are not there or it won't continue as such.
And of course, one of the goals for Israel in the war is to secure the northern area so that the tens of thousands of residents evacuated in the past year can go home and can go home safely. Stay with us. There's much more to discuss right now. We turn to the long-awaited phone call. U.S. President Joe Biden speaking with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by phone. That call wrapping up just a short while ago. Reports, too, that Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate for president, also joined the call, which lasted for around 50 minutes. Now, the conversation coming as Israel prepares a response to Iran's missile attack last week when it launched 181 missiles at the country. Much speculation as to what that response could entail. More in this report by our Fabio Shapiro.
Relations between Israel and the United States appear never to be this strained. While the U.S. has asked Israel to detail its plan for a retaliation for Iran's missile attack last week, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's trip to Washington has been canceled, something the U.S. believes is not an impediment.
The Secretary has a great relationship with Minister Gallant. I think they've now spoken probably over 80 times, ballpark. They remain in constant communication, whether it be an in-person meeting here or, meetings, phone calls that need to be done remote. That relationship still maintains and can be done, at any time, any place in the world, including when the Secretary is back on, has been on travel and taken calls, over the Mid-Atlantic.
The trip was reportedly canceled by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who demanded U.S. President Joe Biden call him instead. Sources indicated that Netanyahu also wanted to prevent Gallant from getting credit for solidifying a joint U.S.-Israel strategy on Iran. This comes as a new book by journalist Bob Woodward delves into Netanyahu's and Biden's interactions regarding the war, in which the president is quoted as saying, "The Israeli leader only cares about himself and does whatever he wants." The book also claimed Biden asked Netanyahu not to engage with Iran after the first attack in April. Now, the Americans are waiting for the Israelis to coordinate their retaliation with Washington, with hopes of preventing a further escalation of the ongoing war. President Biden vetoing an Israeli attack on nuclear and oil sites.
The Israelis have not concluded what they're going to do in terms of a strike. That's under discussion. I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields.
As they await an Israeli response, the U.S. and Arab states have been reported to be holding covert talks with Iran for a ceasefire with Israel, including all of its proxies. Hezbollah supported the idea, while Israel has not yet commented. Following the unexpected Israeli attack on Hezbollah's head, Hassan Nasrallah, senior U.S. officials have said the U.S. is now losing its trust on Netanyahu, a feeling that seems to be reciprocated by the premier. With the elections on the horizon, the Biden administration has also increased its calls for a ceasefire and the promotion of a two-state solution, something out of the question for Israelis before Hamas and Hezbollah are defeated. Meanwhile, Republican challenger Donald Trump is supportive of Israeli war goals. The war in the Middle East is one of the main topics of discussion, and the White House fears that Israeli actions may influence the result.
No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. And I think Bibi should remember that. And whether he's trying to influence the election or not, I don't know, but I'm not counting on that.
So for the latest, let's go live to senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from Washington. And Mike, this highly anticipated phone call between the U.S. president and the Israeli prime minister taking place at last. The two leaders haven't spoken for weeks. Kamala Harris reportedly also joining the call to discuss Israel's retaliatory steps against Iran. It only wrapped up a short while ago. What are you learning? There is much at stake.
The first phone call between Biden and Netanyahu since August the 21st, and it's remarkable in that the United States has said repeatedly they want to make sure they're on the same page with the Israelis in terms of any retaliatory steps taken toward Iran for its ballistic missile attack a couple of weeks ago, saying that they want to make sure that it doesn't escalate into a regional war, that President Biden saying the steps taken by Israel need to be proportionate. I mean, the U.S. kind of laid out here a little bit what they would like to see and what they don't want to see in terms of attacks on Iranian oil sites. President Biden advising against that in comments to the press. So a lot of these things were talked about publicly, but not really with the person who they should probably be directed to at the highest levels of the Israeli government, Prime Minister Netanyahu. So stark in that there was no conversation in the last week or so between the two leaders of these respective countries vis-a-vis potential retaliatory steps against Iran. That is just mind-boggling that didn't take place over the last 7 to 8 days. So finally it comes. Neither side has issued a readout as of yet. The White House did confirm that Vice President Harris was on that phone call between Biden and Netanyahu. Obviously much to work out, and that's partially the reason why Yoav Gallant, the defense minister's trip to the Pentagon, which was scheduled to take place today, was pulled at the very last minute before he boarded the plane yesterday, and some ramifications, I'm sure, politically will come of that as well.
On top of all the latest developments, as always, thank you so much, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, live from D.C. Thank you, Mike. And Sherry Fine-Grossman still in studio, and obviously the U.S. elections are just weeks away. How does this impact what Mike is describing there, the way the U.S. is likely to tell Israel how it thinks it should be retaliating against Iran, and how is Israel likely to respond?
Yeah, it's probably everything. It tells everything, and the election is the most key component here. And I think not in Israel's favor, you would say. I mean, it's obvious the administration only wants quiet and expects Israel to kind of de-escalate the situation or not retaliate as much as it can. There are a lot of voices in Israel, and I think in the U.S. With Trump and Jared Kushner openly saying that this is an opportunity of a lifetime to take out key capabilities of Iran, and that opportunity may not present itself again. And I think it's a real discussion that needs to take place. What I found interesting in the call, it lasted 45 minutes. That signals that it was a professional call. There was also a photograph of the call from the Israeli side, where you see a lot of senior advisor to the prime minister taking place in that call. That tells us it's not a personal call. It's actually very professional. It probably went over the different scenarios and the strategies, and I think that is it's very welcomed.
Danny, your thoughts on exactly that?
Well, I think it's a good thing that the call took place. Finally, I think that the United States here is taking some irrational position vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis the region at all. And we should not actually follow the mistakes of the United States, which actually did not retaliate against Iran when they took out some of the American personnel in the bases in Iraq or Syria, when they captured an American boat with like 22 sailors, when they hit the installations, the oil installations of Aramco in Saudi Arabia, actually taking out 50% of the production of Saudi Arabia, and there was no response. By the way, this is when the Saudis realized that they have to rely more on the United States, on Israel, and hence the Abraham Accord. But I think here the U.S. should understand. We are here in the region, and when they're talking about a proportionate response, what do they mean? We received 181 at least missiles, ballistic missiles. Do they want us to respond with 181 targets in Iran? We have to respond. This is the name of the game here in the Middle East. Otherwise, we are actually inviting the next attack from Iran. We must do it. However, we must do it judiciously. I know that right now, oil installations or the nuclear facilities are not in the cards, but If we act smartly, it could be military installations, especially their long-range ballistic missiles, production of missiles, and also symbols of the government that the Iranian people hate. Like if we hit the Basij headquarters or the IRGC headquarters, I think that could be also a very smart move.
We're going to take a deeper look at what that retaliation may, in fact, look like. Of course, much speculation across the region on that exact issue. Stay with us. There's much more to discuss on the security front because there was a terror attack in the Israeli city of Hadera today. An Israeli Arab citizen going on a stabbing spree in 4 different locations, injuring 6 people. He was arrested on the scene. This all coming more than a week after that fatal terror attack in Jaffa, in which 2 terrorists from Hebron opened fire on the light rail before they were neutralized, and just days after the fatal shooting attack at the bus station in Beersheba, the terrorist there also an Israeli Arab citizen. So for the latest on the latest terror attack, we go to our correspondent, Joe Brown. He joins us from a hospital in Hadera in the north. And Joe, an Israeli Arab citizen goes on a stabbing spree in 4 different locations earlier in the day. Talk us through what happened, what is confirmed, and what more is known about the condition of the people he injured.
Yes, Benita. So as you said, at around about noon today, the police were informed that there was an incident in Hadera. Their first thought was that it was a fight. That was what it seemed to happen. The terrorists stabbed one person. Another person tried to break up the fight, and they also got stabbed. This person then went around on a motorbike to another 3 locations. At his final location, he was confronted by citizens who had weaponry. They had guns, and some of them even had chairs that they were throwing at him. These citizens then neutralized the terrorist, and then the police came and arrested him. There's videos on social media that show what looks like one of the residents shooting him in the leg, with him then limping away. We were at the scene a couple minutes ago, and we saw what looked like a darker patch on the ground, which may have been where the blood was. The police haven't commented on that. However, just a couple minutes ago, we did actually see the terrorist walking out of these doors here. We're going to feed you the footage soon, so stay tuned for that. And he looked very beaten. He, after he was put on the ground, all these citizens were attacking him. The police had to tell them, don't shoot, don't attack, we have it from here. But he still injured 7 people, as well as 1 person who was treated here for anxiety. The latest information from the hospital is that 1 person is in serious condition, 1 is in critical condition, 4 are in moderate condition, and 1 is in light condition. Today, at least 4 of those people have been operated on, and we wait to hear what the hospital has to say on the latest for them. But as of yet, there have been no confirmed casualties.
Difficult for police to prevent attacks like these. We appreciate the update. Thank you so much for now. That's our Joe Brown in Hadera. More to come from Joe in the coming hours. And Sherry Fine-Grossman, very difficult for police, for authorities to be able to prevent incidents like this from happening, but also worrying how many of them have happened like this involving citizens of Israel. Your assessment?
Well, we have been facing terror attacks ever since before the State of Israel was established. So this is kind of more the same. This is a scenario we feared for a long time, which hasn't actually materialized, as so many Israeli Arab citizens and 95 or 99% of them have been very peaceful, have actually transformed, and they understand that they are Israeli just like us. Yes, there are still a lot of thousands of people that are, they going through incitement, and they are, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, whatever. But this is a sensitive week. This is the week of October 7. We know from Israeli security forces there have been hundreds of alerts on pending, on potential attacks. So this shouldn't be a surprise to us. This is a constant challenge, and a challenge that the democracy is facing. And we're fighting in so many fronts. We have, in one day, we had ballistic missiles from Yemen, we had rockets from Lebanon, we had drones from Iraq, and then we have things coming from the West. So this is a multi-front war, and it's very, very challenging. But we have to say the trend is on the strategic level is in Israel's favor,
and certainly speaks to how high emotions are right now inside the country, as you say, just after the commemoration of 1 year since the start of this war, the Hamas terror assault on the 7th of October.
Yes, I think, Benita, we should be very proud of the citizenry here. I think the people of Israel are strong, are resilient, although we ache very much and mourn every casualty. Every person for us is like a whole world. But we are fighting. We keep our heads up, and 7 fronts, as Shiri mentioned, but yet in all these fronts we have good answers to. When it comes to the lone wolf attackers like we had today in Hadera, this is the hardest thing to prevent, because you don't have any traces. They just come in the morning and decide whatever they want. I believe that most of, let's say, the organized attacks by Hamas, Judea and Samaria, the Shin Bet, which is mostly in charge of, security inside, domestic security, we are preempting. Just today, they killed 4 major terrorists in Nablus, almost on a daily basis. But the lone wolf is something that is the hardest to prevent.
Certainly difficult and heartbreaking scenes indeed to see unfolding within the country as well. Danny Ayalon, thank you so much. Stay with us. And Shiri Fine-Grossman, thank you for your insights. We're going to take a very short break, but we will be back with more coverage. And we take a deeper look at the latest reaction across the Middle East to the security situation we've just been describing. Our guests will stay in studio. Stay with us. Back in just 2 minutes.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome back to Middle East Now. Our coverage continues. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now, let's take a deeper look at the reaction in the Middle East. The only two Arab countries to have made peace with Israel, Egypt and Jordan, are both expressing their solidarity with Lebanon in the face of what they call Israeli aggression. Hezbollah has been showing its support for Hamas in Gaza for more than a year now, since the day after the Hamas terror onslaught in southern Israel, with near daily rocket and drone attacks on Israel's north, including today, as we were discussing earlier on in the show. Now, both Amman and Cairo have repeatedly warned that the region is on the brink of an all-out war and have accused Israel of being given impunity by its Western allies. So for more, we now go live to Cairo and we welcome Hussein Kamal Haridi, former assistant to Egyptian Foreign Ministry and the former director of the Department of Israeli Affairs at the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. Thank you so much, Hussein, for joining us on this day. So we heard the foreign ministers from Egypt and Jordan calling for an end to what they call Israeli aggression on three fronts: in Gaza, the West Bank, and now Lebanon as well. More than a year into the war, a war started by Hamas and supported by Hezbollah, Israel still facing existential threats on several fronts. So talk us through the Egyptian reaction, the criticism out of Cairo right now.
As a matter of fact, Madam, I wouldn't call it criticism. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister threatened Lebanon. If the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government won't get rid of Hezbollah, then Israel would mete out on Lebanon the same that happened in Gaza, or that has been happening in Gaza for now over 12 months. And of course, this is a threat to a sovereign country. And as the Lebanese Prime Minister said, Lebanon, as a sovereign country and independent country, did not declare war on Israel. So this is the first point. The second point is that it's past time now, Madam, that the Israeli government should declare that it accepts the ceasefire proposal by President Biden and by the Security Council last June. Thirdly, what we miss is that no one now is speaking about the Israeli hostages in Gaza. The Israeli army or some forces are advancing in southern Lebanon, and what is the sort, what is the destiny of the hostages, Israeli soldiers and foreign hostages in Gaza? No one speaks about their destiny now. So what Egypt and Jordan, and as you rightly said, Madam, these are the two countries that signed peace treaties with Israel, that the two countries are very worried about the things that are developing. And the Israeli Prime Minister wants to open as many fronts as possible for the longest possible time. So now we, of course, and we are expecting an Israeli attack on Iran. And no one knows, and I doubt anyone in Israel knows how, in case that the Israelis would strike Iran, how things would develop not only between Israel and Iran, but in the Middle East. And when I said the Middle East, Israel is part of the Middle East. Right. Israel cannot go on behaving as it's the only power dictating the destinies of the Middle East.
Hussein, I need to respond to several issues that you are raising right now. First of all, you're talking about the Hezbollah threat that is existing across from Lebanon. Today, 2 people killed by rockets. We also know that Hezbollah has been launching rockets and drones for more than a year, regular rockets and drone attacks on civilian cities in the north of Israel as a show of support for Hamas in Gaza. We have just seen footage of a tunnel from southern Lebanon through to Israel. That triggers a lot of responses when we saw the tunnels that were built in Gaza, right close to the Egypt border as you sit in Cairo right now. And you said as well that people here are not talking about the hostages. That is clearly not true. The heart of the nation is waiting for word on the fate of the 101 hostages still in captivity in Gaza right now, which brings me to my next point. You're sitting in Cairo. Egypt had a huge role as a mediator in recent months in trying to secure a deal, not only for the hostages, but to bring an end to the war. Where do things stand on that front right now?
Well, Madam, let me say that we in Egypt, as a people, as a government, as a country, we would like this state of affairs in the Middle East that has been going on, unfortunately, for 1 year to come to a stop. If the Israeli government, when I'm speaking about no one speaking about the hostages, I was referring to the Israeli government, not to the Israeli people. We sympathize with the Israeli people. We sympathize with the families of the Israeli hostages and the foreign hostages in Gaza, as much as we sympathize with the Palestinians, madam. And the whole situation in the Middle East is really hard breaking, not only for us as Egyptians, for any human being. And so Egypt, we mediated last November, madam, with the Americans and the Qataris. We mediated a 1-week truce. And we were doing our best to renew this 1-week truce so that we can help in releasing more Israeli hostages. But for one reason or another, the Israeli government did not agree to the renewal of the truce. And we have been trying for the from last April or even from last March, we have been trying hard with the American administration, with the Qatari government, in order to convince the Israelis. And here, when I say the Israelis, I'm referring to the Israeli government, by the way, to convince the Israeli government that it's about time to agree on a ceasefire. And until now, the Israeli government has different ideas, madam. It's not interested in a ceasefire, neither in Gaza nor in southern Lebanon.
Just to be clear, in terms of the threat that still exists to civilians living in this country, it exists right now out of Gaza, rocket fire emanating from the northern Gaza Strip on this day. It exists right now out of southern Lebanon, Hezbollah firing rockets on this day. And you alluded earlier to what Israel might do in response to Iran. Just to be clear, Iran fired 181 missiles directly at Israel, the second direct strike since this war started. So when we are outlining what it takes to get to an end to the war, one has to be honest as well as a broker in acknowledging the threats that exist to the country right now. Over a year since this war started, a war started by Hamas. Very briefly, what kind of pressure do you think Cairo could put on Hamas to reach some kind of a deal to get the hostages home? And hopefully a ceasefire can also happen potentially with Hezbollah, if that is realistic. Your thoughts very briefly, please.
Yes, madam. A ceasefire agreement would take two sides to agree to it, madam. True. And there is a proposal on the table. I'm not going to defend Hamas people. I'm sitting here. This is an Egyptian point of view, an Egyptian angle on the situation, on a developing situation. We want to bring it to an end. We want either the killing of Israelis or the killing of Palestinians or the killing of Lebanese. We want to bring it to a stop right now and not tomorrow, madam. So we need some comprehension. We need some cooperation on the part of the Israeli government. That's the issue, madam, for us.
Hussein Kamal Hariri, we certainly hope that all stakeholders involved right now will come to the table and that there could possibly be some kind of middle ground. For now, we need to leave it there. Live from Cairo, Hussein Kamal Hariri, thank you very much for being with us on Middle East Now.
My pleasure. Thank you, madam.
Danny Ayalon, your response.
Well, I would like to see Egypt receiving some attacks from their Sudanese border or from Libya. Actually, any other country receiving such attacks unprovoked as Israel would have responded in even much worse way and even less discriminately. I think that the Israeli military and defense establishment is probably the most professional and impressive in the world by actually minimizing collateral damage. And also, it is Israel who is basically receiving all those attacks, which are also directed basically at changing the entire architecture of the Middle East, which will be to the detriment, thank you, to Egypt, Jordan, and all the other Sunni countries. So basically, Israel is the buffer now from all those provocations from Iran, the threats from Iran, the Shia crescent. We are the ones protecting them. They know it. But for some domestic issues, they have to show solidarity with the Palestinians, but they enjoy it in both ways. Israel is protecting them in terms of their securities, and at the same time, they bash Israel in order to get more points from the Palestinians.
Look, I think there are a few interests of from Egypt, from the Egyptian perspective, why it wants this quiet. It's bad for business. It's bad for the economy, an economy that is struggling as far as Egypt is concerned. And also, you know, a vast majority of the population supports the Palestinians and doesn't want to threaten the government of al-Sisi. But, you know, and another thing that I think is more important is that they haven't really grasped what has happened here. We had this quiet time of peace, supposedly peace, but turns out it was all a lie. We know we were very conscious of what was happening in the north of the plan, of the Galil plan to take over the Galil and the tunnels, but we were not as conscious of what was happening, aware what Hamas was preparing on October 7. And the fact that there was peace or quiet or a ceasefire, there was a ceasefire on October 6, but does that ceasefire really mean that that Israel was secure or that Egypt was secure? And I don't think it's in Egypt's interest that Iran continues with what it's doing in the Middle East. So this is something that they need to understand or see eye to eye, I hope, with us, because we have a lot of similar interests. But it's not just Egypt, it's the Democratic administration and other administrations in the West that needs to realize we can win here, but we need to come together with us. We paid a huge price and toll as civilians and as soldiers. But we have this strategic, historic opportunity to take down the Islamic Republic regime of Iran, and it could come once in a lifetime, and there's no better time than now.
Stay with us. More to discuss, because as Israel ramps up operations against the Lebanese terror organization Hezbollah in Lebanon, as we've been discussing, it appears Israel is also striking Iranian proxies in neighboring Syria. The IDF tends to avoid commenting on activity inside Syria, but it has often vowed to prevent Iranian entrenchment there. Our Alex Schloss has the details.
Syria says a suspected Israeli airstrike killed one member of the country's security forces and wounded another near the southern city of Kenitra, close to the Israeli border. This comes just a day after at least 7 people were killed and another 11 injured after a suspected Israeli airstrike on the Syrian capital of Damascus on Tuesday night.
I was passing nearby, then I saw missiles hitting the area. What is this kind of revenge? May God save us. People are going back and forth. It is a civilian neighborhood, not a military one. May God save the Syrian army and the resistance.
Tuesday night's strike targeted a residential building in the Mazeh suburb in western Damascus, with reports stating that 3 missiles were launched from the direction of the Golan Heights. Air defenses were activated, but failed to intercept the projectiles.
We were getting a coffee, then suddenly we heard the first explosion, then the second, then the third, so we left and came running. When we arrived, there was huge white smoke billowing up. Then we saw this scene.
While Syrian state media reports that those killed were all civilians, Opposition outlets say the targeted building was regularly used by Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel, and that casualties included 2 members of the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah. According to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, strikes attributed to Israel in 2024 have killed 25 members of Iran's IRGC, 47 members of Hezbollah, and dozens of Syrian regime forces and Iranian-backed militiamen. The Assad government in Syria has so far avoided direct confrontation with Israel as part of Iran's axis of resistance since Hamas's October 7th attack. But as Israel ramps up operations in Lebanon, it appears that it is also hitting weapon stores and smuggling networks that serve as Hezbollah's lifeline across the Syrian border.
So for more insight, we now welcome Joel Rayburn, Director at the American Center for Levant Studies and a former U.S. Special Envoy for Syria. Joel, thank you so much for joining us. Much to discuss in the region, but I want to start with the Iranian threat and the expected Israeli response. Amos Yadlin, the former head of Israel's military intelligence, quoted as saying the Israeli response to Iran will be something the Middle East has never seen. What do you understand that to mean? What are you expecting to see happen?
Well, first of all, I think, which I've already stated on X, anytime Amos Yadlin makes such a statement as that, I'd sit up and take notice, because I take him and his analysis very seriously. And I also think it's not just Amos, but others like him who remain plugged in with the Israeli national security community. And so I take that very seriously. What I take that to mean is that I think those of us here in Washington are expecting some sort of direct Israeli retaliation against the Iranian regime itself, as well as against the different tentacles of the axis of resistance, which are already being hit in Lebanon to great effect, but also in Syria, potentially in Iraq, and potentially in Yemen, although I think Yemen is less strategically significant. But I think the strike in Damascus the other night, which took place in the Meza neighborhood, which many Syrians have known for years, is a place where the IRGC Quds Force has housed some of its officers and potentially held meetings, for example, with Hezbollah and so on, and other proxies to be able to plan operations. I think that indicates, yes, that the aperture is widening for Israeli retaliatory strikes.
And you mentioned being in Washington, the U.S. role here under the microscope, given that President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke just a short while ago. Kamala Harris, the vice president, also on that call. And of course, Lloyd Austin and Yoav Gallant possibly going to meet soon. Do you think the U.S. will give Israel the room it needs to act decisively and fully eliminate the existential threats it's facing right now?
Well, after the Iranian regime launched 181 ballistic missiles at Israel, our closest Middle Eastern ally, I don't see how a U.S. administration could try to prevent Israel from taking what steps are necessary to restore deterrence against that sort of attack. And it's the second time that it's happened. Luckily, the fact that both times in April 13th, 14th, and most recently, that April essentially blocked the shot, if you will, to use a basketball metaphor, doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be a restoration of deterrence from Israel's perspective and from that of the United States concerning our close ally. I would be really stunned if the U.S. administration really did take steps to try to prevent Israel from reestablishing deterrence.
We certainly appreciate your insights. The region is watching. The world is watching. Joel Rayburn, live from Washington. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Meanwhile, Iran is warning Gulf states not to allow its airspace to be used for attacks against the Islamic Republic. Tehran telling Arab states it would be unacceptable if they allowed use of their airspace or military bases against Iran, reiterating there would be a response to any such move. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi visiting Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, including Qatar, for talks on the precarious situation. So for more, Simon Henderson, the director at the Gulf and Energy Policy Program at the Washington Institute, joins us now. Simon, Thank you so much. So much speculation about what Israel might target as part of its response to this Iranian direct missile strike at the start of this month. Some suggesting Iran's oil fields, even nuclear sites, other military targets. Your thoughts, your assessment?
Well, this is all very serious stuff, but the most vulnerable part of Iran's infrastructure is its oil installations, oil refineries, oil pipelines. These are unprotected. It's the nature of oil infrastructure. The nuclear infrastructure is protected both by anti-aircraft missiles and that sort of thing, as well as being, in the case of one uranium enrichment plant, found deep inside a mountain. And the other major uranium enrichment plant is protected from ordinary bombs, although significant deep penetration bombs could probably make quite a mess of it.
And so Iran, when it says it wants regional unity in the face of a potential Israeli attack, making it clear any action by a Persian Gulf country against Tehran through the use of airspace or military bases will be seen by Tehran as an action taken by the entire group, and there would be a response. It's a clear message. How do you think Arab nations are likely to feel about that threat?
Well, they're probably very apprehensive, not to say scared. They feel very vulnerable, and they are probably of the mind that Israel is very serious in intending to do something like this. And they're also doubtful whether their long-term alliances with the United States is going to help them out. And so they're looking to Washington in order to persuade Israel to ratchet back on whatever might be considered.
Complicated indeed. And of course, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the UAE all host US military facilities or troops. So some tough decisions to be made all round. Again, the whole nation watching, the region watching, as is the world. Simon Henderson, appreciate your insights live from DC. Thank you, Simon. And back in studio, Shiri, very concerning situation. We know that Israel is believed to be planning something. We don't know what it looks like. Iran threatening anyone who helps make that happen. Your thoughts, your assessment?
Well, it looks like we're going to continue to see this back and forth until, at least I think, until the U.S. administration will join forces with Israel to do something that is big enough and take it seriously enough to take down the regime. I have to say about the previous report about Syria. Syria is a strategic kind of part of the puzzle of the resistance axis. I want to remind viewers that before the civil war in Syria, the Iranians weren't as entrenched in Syria as they are now, and it's a very big opportunity to try to take that back, roll that back of what Iranian did in Syria and then do it in Iraq, and believe that it is possible with enough coordination with regional allies and the U.S. support. I think, like Danny said earlier, the ambassador said earlier about the Aramco attack, we've shown the region that the U.S. is not serious about supporting its allies when they're coming under attack, and that provoked the Abraham Accords and other things. And this is the answer, a strategic alliance that looks at diplomatic and political plays and not just military ones.
And Danny, the Iranian foreign minister meeting Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh just a short while ago. Your insights, what are they likely discussing? How worrying is it?
The Iranians are scared. And of course, they're trying to make all the threats possible now, but they don't have too much that they can do, because Israel will retaliate, and probably in a very effective way. You see, Iran is very vulnerable because the table was turned on them. until now, or until April 14th, with the first attack, they used only their proxies. They were actually hiding behind the proxies. Since Israel took care of the proxies mostly, Iran has no choice but to face us directly. And I think this is a position that they never wanted to find themselves in. As I say, Israel will retaliate, but the goal should be, before anything else, a regime change. Only 20% of the Iranian population supports this regime, which is detrimental to their interests, and this is the goal, and I hope the world will realize it. This is the almost a now or never moment.
30 seconds, Shiri, your parting thoughts on exactly that, the now or never moment.
No, I completely agree, and I think, but I would assume that it's very unreasonable to do that before the U.S. elections. But I think the most critical point in time would be right after the U.S. election and before the nomination of the new administration. That's the really key point in time I would look out for.
And as it all unfolds, we will get experts like our panel here to make sense of it all. Shiri Fine-Grossman and former Ambassador Danny Ayalon, always appreciate your insights. Thank you both so much
Pleasure,
for being here in studio. Thank you. And that is a wrap for Middle East Now for today. I'm Benita Levine. Khaled Ben David is up next. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching. This is I-24 News.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today. wave of Hezbollah rocket attacks across northern Israel turns deadly, with 2 killed in Kiryat Shmona as the IDF advances in South Lebanon. We'll have the latest. Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden speak ahead of the expected Israeli counterattack against Iran amid unprecedented strains in the U.S.-Israel alliance. We'll take a closer look. A knife-wielding terrorist injures 7 people in a stabbing rampage on the streets of Hadera before he is subdued. We'll have that story. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. As the IDF fights on in southern Lebanon, the home front in northern Israel is absorbing some tough blows, from barrages of Hezbollah rocket attacks on several cities throughout the day, which caused injury and death, to a terror attack in Hadera that left 7 wounded. We start with a deadly strike in the far north town of Kiryat Shmona. Although it has been largely evacuated, a handful of residents remain, and 2 of them were killed by falling rocket shrapnel while caught out in the street. Dozens of rockets also struck the Haifa Bay area, wounding at least 8 people there. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more in this report.
A series of heavy rocket barrages on northern Israel, this time with deadly results. A couple in their 40s were killed after being hit by one of 20 rockets launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon at Kiryat Shmona on Wednesday.
A couple was out walking their dogs when the rockets came. One hit roughly 20 yards from them, severely injuring them and the dogs. They were pronounced dead on the scene.
Throughout the day, Hezbollah launched dozens of rockets at Israel's northern communities and a highway, including the largest single barrage of over 90 rockets at Safed. A total of 9 people were injured in various degrees.
We received a total of 8 injured individuals. They all suffered from shrapnel wounds in different parts of the body. 7 are in mild condition, and 1 who was critically wounded now in moderate condition.
The IDF says Hezbollah has launched at Israel more than 12,000 rockets, missiles, and drones since the start of the war a year ago. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes against dozens of Hezbollah targets across Lebanon continued, including striking launch pads and eliminating terrorists. Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati said mediation efforts for a ceasefire with Israel are still ongoing, with Hezbollah's deputy leader indicating they are ready for a deal.
We support the political efforts that Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri is undertaking towards a ceasefire. In any case, after the ceasefire is established and diplomacy is able to achieve it, all other details will be discussed and decisions will be taken collaboratively.
Whether they actually mean it remains unclear, as the Biden administration downplayed chances for a deal at the moment, while voicing support for Israel's efforts to degrade Hezbollah infrastructure.
For a year, you had the world calling for this ceasefire. You had Hezbollah refusing to agree to one. And now that Hezbollah is on the back foot and is getting battered, suddenly they've changed their tune and want a ceasefire. I think it's not surprising given the situation they find themselves in.
Meanwhile, the IDF's ground operation in southern Lebanon continues to expand. Israeli forces eliminated terrorists in close-quarter combat and located terror tunnels hidden beneath civilian homes.
Hezbollah is storing their weapons under the cover of Lebanese civilians. The IDF is operating against Hezbollah with a clear goal to remove the threats to Israeli civilians and enable all residents to return to their home in Israel in safety and security.
A day earlier, Israeli forces demolished a tunnel that crossed into Israeli territory in the western sector of the border, near the Lebanese village of Mawachin, just across from the Israeli community of Zar'it. The IDF said there are no other tunnels known to cross into Israel from Lebanon, as it continues to act to remove the ground threat to Israel's northern border.
And with us in studio, retired IDF Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria. He's the former deputy head of assessment for Israeli military intelligence and a former advisor to the late Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. And of course, Jacques, you're an expert on Lebanon. Hezbollah calling for a ceasefire. sincere or just as desperation on their part?
No, this is a misinterpretation of what was said by Naim Qassem. Naim Qassem was referring to the efforts, to the political efforts to elect a new president. And the order he received from the Iranian foreign minister was that there would be no elections for president in Lebanon until there is a ceasefire. Mm-hmm. This is the exact translation of what transpired is a misinterpretation. Everybody thought that Hezbollah was asking for a ceasefire. In fact, in his speech, he was so, a fury. He just repeated exactly the same message that Nasrallah was sending all the time. Mm. And the fact is that, we see now a situation where the fire has been, rockets are being fired on Israel at a rate that never was before. This is one thing. And, of course, we know that the Iranian advisors are those who are right now conducting the war against Israel, and it seems that as if Hezbollah has recouped from what happened, but still, the leadership has been cut, has been decapitated, and the only ones who are running Hezbollah today are the Iranians.
All right. Well, let's go up to northern Israel in the Kiryat Shmona area, where, of course, they had those deadly attacks, and our Robert Swift is there, and Robert, attacks continuing all throughout the day and into the evening where you are. Give us a sense of what you've been going through even up there in the north.
So we just received a message in the last few minutes from the municipality of Kiryat Shmona, where they essentially described the attack that took place earlier today, which killed 2 people, a couple in their 40s. The municipality said that these people were out walking their 3 dogs. They were in the middle of the road at the time that the siren went off and were unable to get to cover within the time frame. Up here in Kiryat Shmona, so close to the border, people have about 3, 4, maximum 5 seconds sometimes to respond to these attacks. And it's one of the reasons that the police that we've interacted with here in the streets in Kiryat Shmona so frequently, you see them shouting at people not to congregate in large groups and to remain close to shelters. Unfortunately for this couple and their 3 dogs, they were in the open area and they were hit with shrapnel when that projectile exploded, resulting in their deaths. Those were not the only barrages. By no means were they the only barrages today. The impression I got is essentially that Hezbollah decided that today is the day to up the ante, to escalate and to demonstrate the level of fire that they can continue to produce. Whilst we were basically under barrage on our way to Kiryat Shmona a little bit earlier today, the soldiers who were in the bomb shelter where we were at the side of the road, one of them said that this was the largest barrage he had seen during his time up here in the north, and I hadn't seen anything larger, so I'd agree with him. The attacks have been the whole length of the border. Some of them focusing on the areas around Haifa, some of them are focusing here in the east on Kiryat Shmona and Safed and Rosh Pina a little bit further to the south, causing damage and the casualties that we've seen throughout the day.
Right, we should give special mention to the Haifa metropolitan area. Of course, there runs the greatest risk, biggest population area, and they're taking precautions that they had not taken even any earlier stage over the past year.
Yeah, that's right. Haifa is, for want of a better term, the best target for Hezbollah, and the messages coming out of Hezbollah reiterate this. Even in propaganda videos released by the group, they've made repeated mentions of Haifa, essentially pointing out the fact that this is a large city, the 3rd largest city in Israel, and it is well within the range of many of their medium-range artillery rockets.
All right, Robert Swift there in the north. Thank you for that. And Ariel, Hezbollah upping the ante. To what effect here? What would be their strategy to up the ante at this stage?
Well, they kind of have to, because Israel has upped the ante by sending ground forces into Lebanon, and so Israel has escalated the situation, and Hezbollah feels obligated to do so on its own side, with
maybe firing some of those rockets before they think Israel will put them out of action.
Perhaps, but they also want to inflict as much damage as they can to Israeli northern border communities, with at least 19 direct impacts on the city of Kiryat Shmona. That's in addition to more than 90 rockets fired into Tzfat, and the single largest barrage of rockets launched by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon at Israel since the start of the war, surpassing yesterday's largest barrage of 85 rockets. And so they are escalating further the situation. You would expect that with Israel taking the fight to Lebanese territory, that they would respond in a more forceful way, because they do still have the capabilities. And I think this is an indication that Israel has degraded, if not the arsenal of rockets, they have degraded Hezbollah's capability to carry out such attacks. Yes, they continue to escalate, but you would expect, in terms of the capabilities prior to these last couple months, what Israel, the damage that it has inflicted on Hezbollah, you would expect them to be able to carry out more forceful attacks on Israel. That is not the case right now, and so Israel using the backwind from Washington to continue and uproot Hezbollah infrastructure along the border, hoping that once it completes that task in the next weeks, perhaps a handful of months, it would better its positioning to try and impose a diplomatic solution on Hezbollah, whether they agree to it or not.
Well, let's leave that in a minute, because we're going to leave that. Let's,
if I can
very briefly,
very quickly. I mean, there's a strategy. The strategy is to empty the north part of Israel. And today's declaration of the Kiryat Shmona's mayor for 2,000 people who are still there to get out of as soon as possible is exactly what the Hezbollah is looking for.
Well, hopefully that's only a temporary measure, but of course we've said that before, unfortunately. Well, certainly in a related story, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Joe Biden spoke by phone this afternoon as they try to find some common ground on just how Israel will respond to last week's Iranian missile attack. Now, the U.S. has been trying to contain the response of Israel against Iran, and that, along with standing disagreements, of course, over Netanyahu's handling of the Gaza and Lebanon wars, is now putting unprecedented strain on the U.S.-Israel relationship. More in this report from Fabio Shapiro.
Relations between Israel and the United States appear never to be this strained, while the U.S. has asked Israel to detail its plan for a retaliation for Iran's missile attack last week. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's trip to Washington has been canceled, something the U.S. believes is not an impediment.
The Secretary has a great relationship with Minister Gallant. I think they've now spoken probably over 80 times, ballpark. You know, they remain in constant communication, whether it be an in-person meeting here or, you know, meetings, phone calls that need to be done remote. That relationship still maintains and can be done, you know, at any time, any place in the world, including when the Secretary is back on, has been on travel and taken calls, you know, over the Mid-Atlantic.
The trip was reportedly canceled by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who demanded U.S. President Joe Biden call him instead. Sources indicated that Netanyahu also wanted to prevent Gallant from getting credit for solidifying a joint U.S.-Israel strategy on Iran. This comes as a new book by journalist Bob Woodward delves into Netanyahu's and Biden's interactions regarding the war, in which the president is quoted as saying, "The Israeli leader only cares about himself and does whatever he wants." The book also claimed Biden asked Netanyahu not to engage with Iran after the first attack in April. Now, the Americans are waiting for the Israelis to coordinate their retaliation with Washington, with hopes of preventing a further escalation of the ongoing war, President Biden vetoing an Israeli attack on nuclear and oil sites.
The Israelis have not concluded what they're going to do in terms of a strike. That's under discussion. I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields.
As they await an Israeli response, the U.S. and Arab states have been reported to be holding covert talks with Iran for a ceasefire with Israel, including all of its proxies. Hezbollah supported the idea, while Israel has not yet commented. Following the unexpected Israeli attack on Hezbollah's head, Hassan Nasrallah, senior U.S. officials have said the U.S. is now losing its trust on Netanyahu, a feeling that seems to be reciprocated by the premier. With the elections on the horizon, the Biden administration has also increased its calls for a ceasefire and the promotion of a two-state solution, something out of the question for Israelis before Hamas and Hezbollah are defeated. Meanwhile, Republican challenger Donald Trump is supportive of Israeli war goals. The war in the Middle East is one of the main topics of discussion, and the White House fears that Israeli actions may influence the result.
No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. And I think Bibi should remember that. And whether he's trying to influence the election or not, I don't know, but I'm not counting on that.
Well, from all, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He's at the State Department. And, Mike, I can imagine that call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu must be a little, let's say, uncomfortable after some of the revelations, which we can't quote on air, given the language, about some of the things, for example, President Biden has said about the Prime Minister. But there's some, what do we know about the call? And let's keep focused on, I guess, the substantial issues of disagreement that the men have.
Yeah, it is important to note some of those accusations about the colorful language that President Biden has used were made months ago as well. It didn't originate from the Woodward book, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get to the crux of the conversation here. President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking for about 50 minutes, according to the Prime Minister's office. Neither side has issued a readout of the call, though the White House did confirm that Vice President Kamala Harris was on that phone call as well. Certainly, number one on the agenda is coordinating a response to last week's Iranian attacks. The U.S., whether it's Biden or other officials, have said time and time again they want to be in on the conversation. They want to make sure that they're on the same page as the Israelis. They don't want to dictate the terms, but everything needs to be coordinated. As well it should be, given that there are U.S. troops involved and an increasing number of U.S. troops involved. But there is tension right now, partially because of a lack of trust between the two sides. The Netanyahu government feels that the U.S. is leaking the contents of certain meetings and that they're talking about things publicly to an extent that the Netanyahu government feels they're trying to shape the Israeli response through public statements rather than direct conversations. And it's indicative, by the way, that Biden and Netanyahu haven't spoken since August the 21st, that this is how Netanyahu feels the U.S. government is trying to go about things in a very roundabout way, which isn't helpful to the conversation. But also notable here at the State Department yesterday that spokesman Matthew Miller, asked directly about the U.S. posture toward the ground operations in Lebanon, said, hey, it's a different world than it was 3 weeks ago when the U.S. and France were pressuring Israel to implement a 3-week ceasefire, which Israel responded with by assassinating Hassan Nasrallah. He said now the U.S. is more supportive of those ground operations because they see the degradation that's been involved right now in Hezbollah's infrastructure and Israel trying to take advantage of that. So while the U.S. wants to exert all the leverage they can right now in Israel, it is notable that Israeli military operations have kind of shifted the American narrative somewhat. And I think Netanyahu will kind of carry that leverage a little bit, or did carry that leverage a little bit into the conversation with Biden today.
Right. We do have to acknowledge, Mike, reports that Vice President Harris was in on that call. And, of course, the context, all of this coming just less than a month before or about a month before the U.S. election, and how that must be weighing on the White House's calculations right now.
Yeah, I think it's overblown a little bit, to be honest with you. I mean, listen, I talk about this often with you and others, how we're inside our bubble here, and Israel is always the most important. For most Americans, it's not. It's not on their radar. It's a very, very small fraction of the U.S. electorate right now that's paying attention to the issue, and an even smaller portion of the electorate that can actually have an impact on the election when you're talking about certain districts in certain critical swing states. So while, Biden was asked about the possibility that Netanyahu is taking the steps he is right now to try to influence the election, the actual possibility of that happening, of the Israel-Hamas war actually weighing in on the decision in the election, I think is slim to none. I think it's overblown. I think it's kind of a deflection on the issue that's going on right now.
I agree with you, Mike, but I think after when it comes to the election, that people are going to be looking at this issue depending on who wins and who loses, or in fact, it may not really make a difference. It's people are going to be looking at this, maybe overblowing it, as you say, as an election issue, and that does have impact. Mike Wagenheim of the State Department, thanks for that. And Jacques, how much of Prime Minister Netanyahu, of course, Israel has to take into account its deterrence factor, its right as a sovereign nation to defend itself. How much consideration does it have to give to the U.S. concerns here?
Well, for the main issues that expressed by the United States, meaning the targets that should be avoided, I mean, the nuclear and the oil installations, I think that Israel would take would consider that very, very seriously. I think that Israel should target symbolic targets inside Iran, so that all Iranians would see what happens, be it the Majlis, for instance, or Khamenei's the residence. So, sort of targets that all Iranians would look and see exactly what would be the impact on the regime, and certainly make a fool out of him.
Well, that may, but how much will that impact on the Iranian response if Israel doesn't hit a substantial target? For example, as we discussed yesterday, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett calling for an attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities.
Look, Iran escalated its attack following the April strike, and so it does warrant for Israel to escalate its response, which was back then targeting an air defense system in western Iran. And so there's still a big difference, or a lot of wiggle room between one air defense system and Iran's nuclear facilities. And I agree with Jacques that it will probably be on the lower levels of those ladders of escalation. I think Iran is concerned of this escalating into a wider war, and they want to cut their losses. Again, it will depend on how much of a blow Israel does deliver to them. I agree that Israel should go more for the perception, for the optics, but also not just that, also operationality to hit Iran where it hurts. But if it is a substantial attack, obviously it could warrant a stronger Iranian retaliation.
All right. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there was a terror attack in the northern town of Hadera today that saw 7 people injured, 2 seriously, during a stabbing rampage that took place in several locations until the assailant was neutralized by police. The terror suspect, has been reported as Ahmad Jabarin, a 36-year-old Israeli citizen from the nearby Arab town of al-Fahim. Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent Joe Brown, who's at the Hillel Yafa Hospital in Hadera, where those wounded are being treated. What do we know about them, and more about what took place there, Joe?
Yes, so we're here at Hillel Yafa Hospital in Hadera, which is about 5 minutes away from the scene of the attack, and also just arrived on the scene just over my shoulder is Uriel Busso, the Israeli health minister. He has just addressed the media and said that he has spoken to some of the wounded. He's the one with his back to us right now, unfortunately. But he has said that he has spoken to the people who are wounded, those who are still here. There have been a couple who have been discharged, and that he has condemned this absolutely awful attack. So at around about 12 o'clock today, around noon local time, the police heard a report of a fight in which one person was stabbed. It turns out there was actually 2 people who were stabbed there, and this was the start of the terror attack, which, as you said, took place in 4 locations around Hadera. The final location had the terrorist confronted by members of the Israeli public, who confronted him with weapons and with chairs. There was a moment that we saw on social media in which the residents were holding their guns towards him. He then reached into his coat pocket, but before he could, he was shot in the leg. We saw what looked like there was the blood on the scene earlier today. But the terrorist was then apprehended by the police, who had to fight off these residents who were trying to attack him even more. But there was 7 people who were taken to hospital with stab wounds. One of them is critically injured. He has just had surgery and is in the ICU right now. There's one who is seriously injured injured but stable, and there were 4 who were moderately injured. There was another who was lightly wounded who has been discharged now, and there was another 2 with anxiety who were treated, but there is still no casualties so far, but a number of people injured. The health minister is here on the scene, and all in all, an awful day in Hadera.
Right, I think you meant no fatalities so far, which is good to know because a couple of those people were seriously injured. Joe Brown there in Hadera, thank you for that. Jacques, I don't know if we should make too much of it. The second terror attack within a week carried out by an Israeli citizen from the Arab Muslim sector here.
Well, the first one was from the Bedouin area,
right.
The second one is from the northern part of the Arab community in al-Fahim. I think that I hope that this is not the beginning of a wave of attacks coming from Israeli Arabs, which would definitely mean a serious problem that Israel will have to confront.
Right, that is the photo of the attacker from al-Fahim, which does have some radical elements in the community.
It has always been known as a radical place. I mean, radicalism and integrism is part of al-Fahim. There was at the time there were some youngsters from al-Fahim who volunteered to Daesh. They went. I mean, about 140 Israelis were joined Daesh, and they were just caught back when they came back to Israel. Those who were left alive. I think that this is a serious problem. I mean, the only way that you can confront is education.
All right. Let's hopefully, though, of course, that's an effort that takes a generation or generations.
Yes.
And Israel has to deal with the security implications immediately in the meantime to do so. Okay, well, we are heading out for a break. I'm going to ask Dr. Jacques Nerier and our Ariel Osseran to stay with us, but please do remain. We have lots more coming up on the rundown in the coming half hour, and we'll be back with you in just a few minutes, so stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome back to the rundown on I-24 News, and let's get back to the intensifying and widening conflict throughout this region. Now, as Israel ramps up operations against the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah, it also appears that Israel is now striking its network of allies in neighboring Syria. Now, though the IDF tends to avoid commenting on alleged strikes in Syria, it is widely believed to be targeting Iranian interests and, in turn, its proxy forces throughout Lebanon. Alex Schloss has more on that.
Syria says a suspected Israeli airstrike killed one member of the country's security forces and wounded another near the southern city of Kenitra, close to the Israeli border. This comes just a day after at least 7 people were killed and another 11 injured after a suspected Israeli airstrike on the Syrian capital of Damascus on Tuesday night.
I was passing nearby, then I saw missiles hitting the area. What is this kind of revenge? May God save us. People are going back and forth. It is a civilian neighborhood, not a military one. May God save the Syrian army and the resistance.
Tuesday night's strike targeted a residential building in the Mazeh suburb in western Damascus, with reports stating that 3 missiles were launched from the direction of the Golan Heights. Air defenses were activated, but failed to intercept the projectiles.
We were getting a coffee, then suddenly we heard the first explosion, then the second, then the third, so we left and came running. When we arrived, there was huge white smoke billowing up. Then we saw this scene.
While Syrian state media reports that those killed were all civilians, opposition outlets say the targeted building was regularly used by Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel, and that casualties included 2 members of the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah. According to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, strikes attributed to Israel in 2024 have killed 25 members of Iran's IRGC, 47 members of Hezbollah, and dozens of Syrian regime forces and Iranian-backed militiamen. The Assad government in Syria has so far avoided direct confrontation with Israel as part of Iran's axis of resistance since Hamas's October 7th attack. But as Israel ramps up operations in Lebanon, it appears that it is also hitting weapons stores and smuggling networks that serve as Hezbollah's lifeline across the Syrian border.
And still with us in studio, Dr. Jacques Neria and our Ariel Osran, an area you've commented several times throughout the year, as Alex did there, on, I would guess you could say, the relative restraint of Syria in the ongoing conflicts of Israel with other Iranian proxies. But you have to wonder if it reaches a point with these kind of Israeli strikes where that posture can be maintained if it, for example, is at the wish of the Assad government.
Look, Syria is involved in the Iranian axis. It is the storage facility of Hezbollah. That is what Syria is currently used for. It's where all the Iranian weapons making their way, whether it's via the air or via land, sometimes also via sea. That's where they end up going prior to making their way to Lebanon. That is continuing. So Syria is involved in this war against Israel, but in a more supportive way. They're talking about the supportive fronts to Gaza. So Syria is a supportive front to the supportive fronts, so to speak. And it was interesting that in his visit earlier this week to the region, Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, visited Beirut. He also visited Damascus, and then he also visited the Gulf, warning them not to allow Israel to use their airspace in their attack against Israel. But we have not seen, or let's put it this way, Syria is so far the quietest of all the different proxy fronts against Israel. It could indicate Assad's reluctance to join the fray in an active war, but we can't let Syria off the hook because they are an active part in supporting the Iranian axis and supporting Hezbollah's efforts to target Israel.
Right, and Bashar Assad, I'm sure, is still worried about the forces arrayed against him, the rebel forces in the north of the country, and that
what is left of Syria, I mean.
Right.
Because, I mean, if you look at the map today, you know, the northeast has been taken by the Kurds, the northwest has been taken by the Turks, the south has been taken by the Kurds and the Russians, and the Golan Heights has been taken by the Iranian militias. What is left is only Damascus and the vicinity.
Yeah, all right. Well, obviously then Bashar Assad trying to hold on to his last bit of Syria that he controls.
The last bastion.
Well, let's move now from Syria to its neighboring country. As airlines cancel flights to and from Lebanon, many nations are beginning to send military aircraft and ships to evacuate their citizens from that conflict zone. So far, dozens of countries have opted to pull out their nationals, and many more are expected to follow suit. Again, it's our Alex Schloss with the story.
As airlines cancel flights to and from Lebanon and Israel over the intensification of conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, more and more countries are moving to evacuate their citizens out of the conflict zone.
The purpose of today's operation is to evacuate the Turkish nationals who are stranded in Lebanon because of the worsening security situation. And upon the request that we received from our compatriots, the Turkish citizens living in Lebanon, we have, under the coordination of the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in cooperation with the relevant Turkish authorities, we have planned this evacuation operation, which will be conducted by sea.
In addition to Turkey, which opted to evacuate its citizens by sea, over a dozen other countries are rushing to airlift their nationals out of Lebanon.
The whole region is in a state of war. The evacuation stage was a difficult one. The ability to contact and access them was a difficult process. The government and the foreign ministry have done a tremendous job.
The evacuations take place amid increasingly frequent Israeli bombardment of Beirut and the area around its international airport. But for many evacuees, the risky journey to the airport is the only option out.
The conditions were difficult. Movement within Beirut is difficult because the airstrikes are ongoing. The conditions are very difficult in Beirut. Thank God the Royal Air Force of the Jordanian Army evacuated us and took the initiative to take us from Beirut to Jordan easily.
For those less fortunate, like Lebanese residents who don't possess citizenships of another country to flee to, they shelter where they can.
There were bombings and airstrikes, and so we escaped. Thank God we arrived here safe and sound. We managed to get our documents and escaped. We've been in the streets in Lebanon for the last 2 days. Thank God we're here now.
And while most attempt to leave the conflict zone, many Israelis are finding themselves unable to return amid a slew of flight cancellations.
Jacques, I love the irony of all these foreign nationals trying to get out of Lebanon, many Lebanese as well, while so many Israelis are trying to get back to this country because of the cancellations of flights there. But the big story out of Lebanon is not these foreigners, but the internal displacement. We saw that briefly with that last woman with her face covered there.
From the beginning of the conflict with Hezbollah till now, you have almost 1 million Lebanese who were displaced from their homes in South Lebanon towards Beirut, Sidon, Tyre, and other places. And lately, from the Dahia outside from the Dahia to the Shuf Mountains to the.
Well, let's explain that Dahia, the neighborhood, the area of Beirut, which is where Hezbollah is mainly headquartered.
So 1 million. It means that almost one third of the Lebanese population has been moved from its places towards other places. Now there are lots of stories about people trying to rent apartments in areas where they found refuge, and apartments that were used to be rent for $100 or $150 are being rent now for $2,000 each. This is one thing, and now there's a big change in the geopolitical situation between Syria and Lebanon. Whereas since the civil war in Syria, Lebanon was the haven where 1.5 million Syrian refugees found themselves in Lebanon with no rights at all. Now, for the first time, you see the movement backwards into Syria. 300,000 of Syrian refugees have gone back to Syria, and more than 100,000 Lebanese have found refuge in Syria.
And so you have Lebanese now going to Syria
to find refuge, and this is, I mean, and you know, the road to Syria is has been bombed. So there's no way they can cross the border, only on foot. So you can see lots of videos about people coming with the luggage, trying to cross the border, and the Syrian government has been very generous in giving each of the families $100 on the entrance to Syria.
Right, and I do want to actually, there is the statement now put out about comments made by the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzl Levy, today, just briefly saying that Hezbollah is making efforts to conceal the significant damage we have inflicted on the terrorist organization in recent weeks. Also in Iran, they have yet to understand the severity of the damage caused to the forward position they established along our northern border. So the situation there, and you wonder at what point, Ariel, that we discussed early attempts to reach a diplomatic solution, but at which point things become so difficult for the Lebanese in general that somehow enough internal pressure is pushed on Hezbollah to maybe reach to some kind of agreement about, even without admitting it, for example, moving back from the border.
We're not there yet, and there's still a long ways to go, but the atmosphere now, before this erupts into a wider war, there's still room for that to escalate as far as Lebanon is concerned. The sentiment now is less supportive of Hezbollah than it was in the eve of 2006 war, and some would even say in the aftermath of the 2006 war. The Lebanese public is not, as a whole, there is no more a consensus behind Hezbollah as the Lebanese resistance. They are seen as a sectarian group that is dragging Lebanon into the abyss. Unfortunately, if in Gaza we're talking about an alternative to Hamas, in Lebanon there aren't really groups that are strong enough militarily, because Hezbollah is the strongest military in Lebanon, and the most powerful terror organization, some would say, in the world. So in terms of their capabilities to counter that, in terms of weapons on the ground, patrols, stuff like that, they cannot yet threaten Hezbollah's control of the streets of the areas that they're in control of. But I think now, when Hezbollah supporters, they're learning as they try to seek refuge in other places, mainly Sunni areas, Christian areas, and Druze areas, they are not received in open arms as they were in 2006. Whether that translates to attempts to degrade Hezbollah's not military power but political power in Lebanon, we're not there yet.
Right. With all that's going on in the north, of course, we can't avoid still what's happening in the south, in Gaza, the ongoing, for example, IDF operation in Jabalia, trying to retain control. The fate of the 101 hostages still there. And of course, what happens the day after, and how are things going to be administrated there in the Gaza Strip? Now, since October 7th, Israel has been saying that Palestinian employees of UNRWA, of course, that is the UN aid agency active in Gaza and the West Bank as well, participated in the Hamas-led October 7th massacre, and they continue to aid terror organizations. Now, Israel's Knesset is pushing through 2 bills that is aimed at stopping UNRWA from operating here in the state. And the UN Chief Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who has been declared persona non grata by Israel's foreign ministry, is lashing out at a move that he says would be catastrophic. More in this report from our Emma Siegel.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres slammed Israel on Tuesday following Israeli Knesset's approval of the second and third readings of 2 bills aimed at curbing activities of the United Nations Relief Agency, or UNRWA, in Israel.
In the midst of all the upheaval, UNRWA, more than ever, is indispensable. UNRWA, more than ever, is irreplaceable. That is why I've written directly to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to express profound concern about draft legislation that could prevent UNRWA from continuing its essential work in the occupied Palestinian territory. Such a measure would suffocate efforts to ease human suffering and tensions in Gaza and indeed the entire occupied Palestinian territory.
If passed, these bills would prohibit UNRWA from operating within Israel's territory, whether directly or indirectly, as well as stipulating that no Israeli government agencies or representatives may have any contact with UNRWA.
UNRWA Gaza has become nothing more than a cartel, fostering hatred and prolonging misery in Gaza. In July, we provided hundreds of names and IDs of terrorist operatives employed by UNRWA. Yet, unfortunately, some here in this building continue to fund this organization as if it were neutral. Let me be clear this morning. UNRWA cannot be part of the solution. They are part of the problem.
But while Israel has argued the threat that UNRWA poses to the state's security, Guterres says the bills would have detrimental results.
Let's be clear in practical terms what such a measure would mean. Operationally, the legislation will likely deal a terrible blow to the international humanitarian response in Gaza. UNRWA's activities are integral to that response.
Both bills are a combination of other bills proposed by members of Knesset in the coalition and the opposition. They were put forward in response to Israel saying that UNRWA workers participated in the October 7th massacre, declared Guterres a, quote, persona non grata, and banned him from entering Israel. While the UN has acknowledged that UNRWA employees, quote, may have been involved in Hamas's massacre in southern Israel last October, Guterres remains unwavering in his belief that it would be a catastrophe for Israel to stop UNRWA from operating in the state.
There's a point to be said that if this bill passes, which it's likely to do, what is going to replace UNRWA in the Gaza that emerges from post-Hamas rule?
I hope that Israel has good ideas, very good ideas, on how to run the Gaza Strip in replacing UNRWA, because UNRWA is not only, I mean, it's not a small refugee organization. It's schools, it's the hospitals, it's clinics, it's everything. It's services. It covers all the levels of life. And I think that if we don't have such an answer, then we would have to face a humanitarian crisis inside Gaza.
Right, and if Israel does not start proceeding on that answer, it looks like already the Palestinians are trying to make their own plans, Ariel.
Well, there's attempts and then there's optics, as it usually goes with Palestinian reconciliation. Fatah-Hamas officials meeting in Cairo today to try and discuss what that day after in Gaza will look like. Don't expect any headlines coming out of
the unification of that's a story 20 years.
So
never-ending story.
And ahead of this meeting, they said that in the absence of Palestinian unity government, the sides would consider agreeing on an interim committee that would manage that would facilitate the cooperation in managing the borders, like the Rafah crossing, for example, but they did not reach agreements on that, and in fact Hamas has backtracked, saying that they no longer agree on this committee. They say that there needs to be a unity government. That is not going to happen. Sure not. There will be a Palestinian state before there is Palestinian unity between Fatah and Hamas, and so even though the Palestinian Authority has brought forth its vision for the day after, discussions with Hamas taking place in Cairo, they're not going to lead anywhere.
The end of UNRWA would mean the end of Hamas.
Okay, so closely they're tied. Well, one thing I think we can safely say is that there's little future, certainly within Israel, for either UNRWA or for Secretary General Guterres.
We always had a problem with Secretary Generals. We had always. All right. Well,
since His term is
seems to perhaps be coming to its end, and certainly
who will replace him?
And that will be the question. That's the devil you don't know, I guess. Yeah. I do want to thank Dr. Jacques Neria and our Ariel Osran for joining us this evening on the rundown. Now, we did speak about the ongoing fighting in Gaza, which is continuing. We still see combat operations, and lives being lost there. In fact, as of now, the ground operation within Gaza has claimed the lives of 350 soldiers, and it has left many, many others wounded, in some cases crippled for life. Now, this is a story of two IDF soldiers who lost their legs battling against Hamas terrorists and are now trying to readjust to their new lives as amputees. But as defense correspondent Matthias Inbar of our French channel reports, they are finding that their personal road to recovery involves the retaking up of arms. Here is that story.
This is the story of two combatants in an elite unit. Each had his right leg amputated during combat in Gaza. Part of their rehabilitation, taking up arms, going to the shooting ranges, and re-feeling the sensations they have experienced in recent years. The gestures are precise, rehearsed. Once ready, these war wounded await the starting signal. The results are categorical. They have not lost their touch, nor their smile.
Not a single day goes by without people making fun of our injuries.
Look, he was amputated below the knee, so we say among ourselves that he has a simple malady. Being amputated is not the end of the story. You can still do anything. You can sprint, participate in the Olympic Games, you climb mountains.
B was a soldier in the elite Duvdevan unit before joining the Shin Bet internal intelligence. In recent years, he was in an elite commando unit before being mobilized with the Reserve Commandos Brigade 551 in this war in Gaza. Wounded in the neck by a grenade on November 2nd, he would return to combat.
The entrance to the tunnel was in a building completely booby-trapped. 10 soldiers entered. I joined them by chance. 4 died on the spot. 4 needed amputations. 2 were moderately injured. We were taken to Ishalov Hospital in Tel Aviv and Sher Zedek Hospital in Jerusalem. I was in Jerusalem for 68 days. I was operated on 18 times. They managed to save my stump so I could wear a prosthesis. And I am here in front of you today, 10 months after the injury. We will soon celebrate 1 year.
Elisha, a soldier of the Givati Commando Unit, was seriously injured during one of the first operations against the advanced positions of the Hamas commandos in northern Gaza.
We worked all night to carry out this operation. At the time when we were withdrawing, we were on the 3rd floor. The snipers were going back. And that's when we were hit by an RPG missile in the room. 2 of my friends died, Roy Wolf and Lavi Livshitz. I was seriously injured. I didn't want to make the situation worse. I crawled out of the room. I put a tourniquet on myself. I was the first to be rescued in Gaza. Deep inside, the vehicles transported me in Israel were targeted by anti-tank missiles and RPGs, which slowed them down. My rescue took almost 3 hours. I was hospitalized for a month and a half, and since then, in rehabilitation.
You're traveling with me in January, but it's expensive. $3,500. Every dollar counts. Yes, you could say that. It's my occupational therapy. You come here to the shooting range, a kind of nostalgia. Memories come back to the surface, but my memory works well. Look, I haven't been to the shooting range for a very long time, and the shots are all on target.
A way of living through his weapon, his partner, during the last years of service.
All these wounded are heroes, young people who have experienced very serious things, both physically and mentally. Most of the time, these young people leave their daily lives and begin their rehabilitation. But here, Boris told me, I am a fighter. He was wounded twice, but he tells me, I am an amputee, of course, but I am a fighter. I put on my uniform with which I saved my people, and I returned to my natural state of combat. I would have been happy not to know him. Well, not for these reasons. But from the moment he regains his status as a fighter, look at his impacts. He drew a mustache on the target. He is a real fighter. Not only on the battlefield, but in life, too. He fights to live. He fights to find a normal life, to work, to study. I admire him.
Barak has a big heart. He visits so many wounded soldiers, and we will also climb Kilimanjaro together. He is a king. I love him. Thank you for sharing my message and that of Elisha without forgetting that of Barak. All of Israel must hear it. There are still many wounded. They must be rehabilitated. The injury is not the end of the world. We must forge a new path and move forwards.
Quite an inspiration. And I do believe they'll make it to the top of Kilimanjaro one day. Remarkable men. That ends this edition of The Rundown. Thank you for joining us. Of course, you can continue to follow us on our website and all our social media platforms. And I'll end the program, as I do when I have the time, to say let's hope to see, well, 101 of the Israeli hostages in Gaza and all others return home safe and sound as soon as possible. Thank you for joining us.
Made for